Yes, no problem.
So that's so nice of you. And yeah, so I'll be happy to, have some opening, views from you with regards to, of course, mediation, something what you've heard about missing bridge, our views, our way of positioning it as a center. And then probably I'll come back with some questions, some follow-ups, totally up to your comfort. And then we'll take it from there. Over to you, Ken. And
Excellent.
thanks once again, by the way. Yeah.
Terrific. So
Okay.
would you like me to just begin?
Yeah, your opening remarks, because okay, maybe you can answer my first very basic but very important question, which is, how do you perceive, what is the level of awareness of mediation as a concept in the world currently, and the way it should be, not the way people are defining it at times in a very rigid, in a very myopic way, but the way it needs to be understood. So what do you think is the level of awareness as we sit today in the world? Yeah.
There are two ways of approaching the problem.
Yeah.
The first is from the perspective of the people who are using it, the people who are looking for mediation, the people who are attempting to practice the profession. That is, the clients, the lawyers, the judges, the communities in which conflict resolution is important.
Right.
And what that basically looks at is just how to apply it in a variety of settings based on how conscious people have become of their conflicts and the possibilities of resolving them. But there's a second approach. And the second approach is to begin with the idea itself and ask the question, what is contained within this practice?
Yeah.
And if we ask the question, what determines the nature of mediation? The answer is the nature of conflict, because mediation is an operation that is performed on a conflict in order to reverse it or minimize it or reduce it or to transform it, even to transcend it. So it's the nature of conflict that determines the nature of mediation. Then we have to ask the second question, how widespread is conflict? And the answer, of course, is that it's everywhere. And this means that anywhere where there's conflict, there's a possibility for people to discover a better way of being in conflict.
Right.
And we then have to ask, what kind of operation is it that mediation performs on conflict? And the answer is, I think, at least 6 separate and distinct operations. So if we ask another question first, which is, where are conflicts located? We will come up with at least 3 answers.
Yeah.
1, internally, inside of each of us.
Right.
2, relationally and between us. And 3rd, systemically and around us. And each of these locations of conflict requires a different set of techniques and also presents a different set of challenges with different levels of acceptance and awareness of how it might be possible to discover a better way forward. So we can also begin by asking another question, which is, what does conflict consist of? And I think that the short answer is that it consists of being stuck. But then we need to ask the question, why are we stuck? And what gets us unstuck? And what are the levels of being unstuck? So the first level of being unstuck is stopping the fighting. And this corresponds to a whole set of conflict resolution practices, techniques, methodologies around separation, caucusing, shuttle diplomacy back and forth between 2 different groups of people. And This first level is positive, as anyone who has ever been close to warfare or violence can easily understand. But separating people in order to stop their conflict doesn't help them discover how to settle the issues. So the second level is the level in which people come together and talk about what their differences are, identify the issues that need to be worked on and resolved, and come up with solutions for those problems. And so that what works at the first level doesn't work at the second level. The first level is really largely physical. That is, it has to do with the physicality of conflict. The second level is mental, which is it has to do with people, the way people think about their conflicts, about the issues that are presented. And now what we discover is that the issues that are presented in conflict only constitute about perhaps 5 or 10% of the conflict.
Right.
And about 90 to 95% of what takes place in any conflict takes place beneath the surface of the issues that people are talking about. This means there's another level. So if the first level is physical and the second level is mental, the third is emotional.
Yeah.
And what this says is that there is an emotional component in every conflict. And now the techniques that you use to identify the issues, to analyze the problem, to identify what the principles are that you want to apply in order to be able to resolve the dispute. In other words, the legal project of identifying a set of legal standards or principles or at the very least, sort of descriptions of acceptable behavior. None of this applies to the emotional realm. And when we just move into the emotional realm, we require an entirely different, higher order set of skills. And these are the skills that families require, that couples require, that civil society requires. And the law can offer ideas and suggestions, and to some extent, some sort of objective standards, but those standards don't work subjectively. Everybody has a different set of emotions, and they need to have their emotions grappled with. But then what we discover is that even after you have worked, for example, with married couples, and you have resolved those emotional issues, there is still something that is left over. And I will describe this as something that is spiritual. And by spiritual, I do not mean religious. I mean that there is not only a physical conflict between people, a mental conflict in which people think hostile thoughts about one another, an emotional conflict in which they feel gripped by some intense emotion that they're not in control of. In addition, there is the memory of what happened to them, and they're holding on to that memory. And here we come to terms with the wisdom traditions of the world, because what mediation fundamentally is a wisdom tradition. It is less concerned about knowledge than it is about the choices that one makes in one's life. And here we can find out that there is something interesting that we can look at that tells us that there's something deeper going on here than just the memory of what has happened to you. And that is basically this. I wrote a book called The Crossroads of Conflict. And in it, I asked the question, who gets conflicts? And one way of looking at that is to ask the question, who doesn't get conflicts? And here are two answers. One, there are no 2-year-olds who get into conflicts over romantic love. Why? They're not ready yet. Number two, there are no 60-year-olds who get into conflicts with their parents over what time they're going to be coming home at night, we hope. Why? Because they figured out how to solve that problem for themselves.
Right.
So conflicts occur at a crossroads. Every conflict occurs at a crossroads that's created on the one hand by a problem we are now required to solve, and on the other hand by the fact that we do not yet have all the skills we need in order to solve it. So what this means is that conflicts are a little arrow pointing directly at what we most need to learn. Every conflict is something that points us at what we most need to learn. And if that's the case, then there's a deeper spiritual question involved in conflict resolution, which is, what are you going to do with your life? How has conflict crippled you? And how might it actually point in the direction of a path to your own your own authentic self? So this is, I think, the fourth level of dispute resolution. There's a fifth, which we can see in connection with particularly families, married couples. And that has to do with something else, which is what is it that shuts down inside of us when we experience conflicts? And what is it that opens up again? And I think that it is the capacity for caring about each other. We can think of it at a relatively low level as a capacity for empathy, even sympathy. But there's also at a deeper level and within couples and within families, the capacity to open your heart again to someone who has injured you, someone who has hurt you at a deep level. It has to do with caring. And so I think of conflict resolution as being essentially about caring. Now, this means that it's a caring profession. And that shifts our understanding of what conflict resolution is. There is a way of thinking about this, which has to do with anger. So if we look at anger as a very common emotion, the question is, why do people get angry and what do they get angry about? And here's the answer that I have come up with after 40 years of mediation. Nobody gets angry over things they don't care about. And therefore, all anger is basically about a way of saying what you care about. And if that's the case, there is a mediative possibility, which is essentially a way of, and I like the idea of the missing bridge, because what we're talking about is creating a bridge between people and within people. And then the final level, in my view, has to do with the conflicts that take place around us. That is, the cultures, the systems, the structures, the organizational settings, the contexts within which conflicts occur. And here we have a really excellent tool invented by William Ury, who wrote Getting to Yes with Roger Fisher, along with Steve Goldberg and Jean Brett. And the technique is called conflict resolution systems design. And the goal of systems design is prevention. So if we go back to the beginning and we talk about separating people, what do you get as a result? You stop the fighting. When you work with the issues and you reach agreements between people about what's going to happen with the issues, you settle the issues. And then you move to resolving the underlying emotional reasons for the dispute. And from there, it becomes possible to reach forgiveness. which is a way of letting go of the conflict inside yourself and turning it into a something that has meaning in your life. Then the question of the heart piece, and to me that equals reconciliation, and the final piece equals prevention. So if what this says is that conflict resolution is an absolutely enormous world historical possibility that infuses every single conflict that we experience as human beings. And so where we are right now is we are taking baby steps. The law has been around for hundreds of years, but mediation has been around for just a few decades. But what it fundamentally represents is that it is a law-creating process. So we can think of mediation as being what is sometimes called bargaining in the shadow of the law.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the law is an effort to resolve conflicts. But it's one that doesn't give you adequate skills to deal with emotion or any of the other issues that I've identified other than the nature of the issues. So for this reason, it seems to me that justice in the law courts is largely an accident, whereas it is at the center of conflict resolution. When I say it's an accident, what I mean is that we have a win-lose process in which one side wins and the other side loses. But what if both sides have something that is true about them? The assumption is that one side's true and the other side is false. But what if they're both true? What if the problem you're presented with is a paradox? What do you do when you resolve it by deciding for one half of the paradox? You destroy the complexity of the problem. And this may be acceptable if the problem is simple, but if the problem is actually complex, destroying its complexity means an inadequate form of problem solving. So what we want to do is we want to solve problems on multiple levels. But in order to solve the problem, we have to stop the fighting, and then we have to look at the nature of the problem, and then we have to figure out what's underneath the problem that's actually driving it invisibly, subconsciously, in the minds and hearts of people. And then we have to figure out what is it that we really care about as people, and how do we bring that caring into the conflict resolution process and really show people that there are opportunities for them to learn from each other through their conflicts, to become closer together as a result of their conflicts. That is revolutionary. So I wrote a book called A Conflict Revolution, which is about an effort to try to look at all of these different types of conflicts. Now, the reality is let's go back to the first definition that you suggested at the very beginning. And lawyers are not interested in any of the higher order skills that are required in order to do this. It's simply not necessary. And for many people, many of the clients who come in, they want this thing to be over. And so what we have to do is help them get it over. But we also have to understand that even when we settle those disputes, there is lingering beneath the surface the possibility of future disputes. And what we really want to help people do is not even so much resolve their conflicts. We want to help them outgrow them. And they outgrow them, they transcend their conflicts through the discovery and the learning of higher order skills. And now we have a final piece of this, which I think is very important for us in the planet today. We are facing a divided world. We just had an election in the United States. In this country, we are deeply divided. And what we can say about the nature of the political process is that it generates chronic conflicts.
Yeah.
And the nature of that process, all you have to do to create that process is to have deeply important questions that are complicated, that you then decide in an either or fashion by voting for one side or the other. But if the problem is digital, if it's that's one thing, but if it's analog, that's something different. And so what you do is you create a political process in which no matter who wins, half the country hates them. And if we think of politics as a problem-solving process, this is no way of solving problems. And we now face climate change that cannot be resolved through military force or through litigation or through ordinary forms of diplomacy. What has to happen is nations, cultures, groups of people have to come together and work together to make a solution that's actually going to work. And so far, we have failed to do that. And we know what the answer is. It's going to be devastating for all of us. And we have a war in the Middle East right now in which both sides are implacable. And in Ukraine and Russia, and in Sudan, and various places around the world. And I think from the outside, with some perspective, we can see that there are solutions that are possible in all of those cases. But from the inside, they can't see that because they're caught up in their conflict and they don't dare give up because that would mean death and destruction. It would mean a defeat. But can we create a conversation in which nobody loses? That's what mediation is.
Sure. Absolutely. No, that's wonderful. I mean, for one, I've gone too much deeper through you into so many aspects. And as you spoke, I was even jotting down some very important points. Reason being that I have seen people talking very, very superficial, very, very macro at times for the simple reason it seems to them as a flavor of the season.
Yes.
So mediation, if you are engaged with mediation, if you speak about mediation, somebody will say, wow, he's a good guy, he speaks for the noble cause. But you take the next step and the guy will probably show the true sense. Now here it's very important, couple of things which I wanted to share. What I gather is there is no one size fits all. That's very clear. Because when we say we have to find a common ground, that means we have to hear both the sides. Both the sides might be right. Both the sides have a view. They are privy to their own point of view. And essentially, we need to understand the perspectives and the perceptions why these things crop up. But the law tends to draw a straight line because law needs to be objective to the extent it can be, because it's it tries to do larger good for the larger society, which means you need to be objective to a certain extent. You need to be quantified, you need to be monitored, you need to be benchmarked, and none of that is true with regards to mediation. Now, so one concern we have is wherever in few countries, now in India as well, wherever we have tried to codify it, have we really lost the relevance of mediation? Because a codification means a kind of a law, and if it's a law, it becomes enforceable. If it becomes enforceable, then means the lines are drawn. So that means somebody will say you've not adhered to this and adhered to that, but where is the audience to both the parties? That means you are again on the presumption that one of them by default will be on the wrong side of the law. Right. So I think we are getting into a trap. And that's the reason I think most of the countries, whether we call them confused till now or probably more evolved in the thought process, that they never thought it prudent to codify mediation. So that's one concern. Second thing, as a school of thought and slightly radical, in spite of the conflicts we have, in spite of we all keep saying that, there are cases pending in the court and there is so much of crime and hate in the society, whatever be the reason. How much percentage of people can you would agree, or you would presume that people really want to uh, you know hurt somebody else, in the sense that as per their own perception, with their own perspective, they do what they think is right, right? So the intent is not to hurt someone, just because that our goals are different, our approaches are different, our objectives are different, and we follow a different path. And we want to probably at times achieve the same thing but differently. And since there's a clash, and hence there is a right and a wrong to it. But what is a percentage you would actually feel that somebody is really working against us? Okay, there's a small percentage which is with a criminal intent. There is a theft, there's a crime. Okay, let's park those things which are very specific. But generally, when we have disputes, I think a lot of it is difference of opinion, difference of point of view. Even if your objective is same, your larger goal is same, but just the very fact that the approach is different, it starts from that difference and probably escalates to a conflict and a dispute. Would you agree to this?
Yes. I'm writing a piece right now called What is an Enemy?
Hmm.
And it has to do with this polarization. And we
Yeah.
need to think about polarization as a process a little bit more deeply. And the law creates automatically a polarization. As an attorney, you can only have one client, and you
Yeah.
present one point of view, and another attorney has another client and presents a different point of view.
Sure. Yeah.
And the theory is that the judge sitting in the middle, having heard these contrasting points of view, will be able
Agree.
to decide what is just and fair.
Yeah.
I have been a judge myself, so
Okay.
I know that that is not always the case. There are
Hmm.
many cases in which both sides want to hide information from the judge. There are cases in which both sides don't care about certain issues that are important in terms of resolving the dispute. But most importantly, here is a question that I mentioned earlier. It has to do with the nature of truth. Um, so uh, let me present it to you in a different way. There
Yeah.
are three questions, three categories of questions that I can ask the members of your audience, or any group of people. Category one, who is the oldest person in this audience? Who's the youngest? Who's the tallest? Who's the shortest? Who lives the closest to downtown Delhi? Who lives the furthest away?
Yeah.
And there is a single correct answer for everyone to all of those questions.
Right.
And those single correct answers naturally arrange themselves in a hierarchy from top to bottom. So there is only one oldest and one youngest and one tallest and one shortest and one closest and one furthest away, and
Yeah.
everyone else is in between.
In
And for
between.
those who are in between, that line that they arrange themselves on becomes a pecking order. It becomes a hierarchy that it becomes possible to attach status and wealth and
Hmm.
power to. So the question then becomes, um, what alternatives are there? So here's the second category of questions. How old are you? How tall are you? Where do you live?
Hmm.
And now there's a single correct answer for each person. There is no
Yeah.
longer any single
You're right.
correct answer for everyone. So
Hmm.
the first category of questions corresponds to the nature of power. They're the kinds of questions that are asked in dictatorships, in monarchies, in autocracies. Um, and the second category of questions are more rights-based, and they're the category of questions that are asked in court. How old are you? Right? Um, and there is a single correct answer for each person.
Hmm.
Category three, what issues are you facing at whatever age you're at. What does your height mean to you? What did it mean to you growing up? What do you love about where you live? What do you not love about where you live? And now there are multiple correct answers for each person. And those multiple correct answers are not exclusive. They include other correct answers. And most of the issues that we face in the world are category 3 issues.
Category 3. Yeah.
That is, it's not just a question of whether something is near or far. It's how distant is it from you, or how distant does it feel to you? And what we want to then be able to do in conflict resolution is we want to be able to ask the full range of questions. But monarchies and dictatorships are not interested in categories 2 and 3.
Right.
The law is not interested in category 3. It's only mediators who are interested in trying to figure out what's happening right now. And here is the way, in my experience, mediation works. The very technique that is successful at 9:35 bombs at 9:36.
Right.
Doesn't work anymore. And the one that didn't work at 9:36 all of a sudden works at 9:37.
Right.
Why? Because people are moving targets. They're
Right.
shifting in their perceptions and what's important to them and how they feel. And most people operate on the basis of how they feel rather than on the basis of what the law provides for them as a set of objective standards, or on the basis of sort of what we can think of as just power itself. So now what I think what this leads us to is the idea expressed very nicely in Buddhist principles of the middle way. But there are multiple middle ways. So apathy is a middle way. Compromise is a middle way. We can even say that hating everybody is a kind of middle way. But the greatest middle way is the one that is collaborative. And here's the fundamental idea. Every conflict represents a place in which there are 2 or more truths, every real conflict. If there was only a single truth, it would disappear rapidly. It just, people would discover very quickly that there's a single truth. And even within mathematics, which is the most objective, sort of rule-based discipline there is, if we ask the question, what is the square root of 16? What's the answer?
It's 4.
4? 4 and
Right.
minus 4. So there are 2 correct answers. And for every x squared, there are 2 correct answers. For every x cubed, there are 3. Every x quartic, there are 4.
You're right.
Now, what are human conflicts? And the answer is there are multiple exponents to every human conflict. So that there's at least 2 correct answers, and generally there are hundreds, thousands, even an infinite, potentially, number of correct answers to any issue that is dividing people.
Right.
So who's right, the husband or the wife? The manager or the employee? The one neighbor or the other neighbor? Who's correct? Well, the difficulty is that's the wrong question. The question that's right is right about what and wrong about what.
Right.
Both of them are right on one level because they're talking about what has happened to them.
Agreed.
And they're wrong on some other level because they aren't able to grasp what happened to the other person.
Right.
So the higher order of truth is the one that combines everybody's truth together. And even on a small scale, there are experiments that have been done. For example, if you take a large glass bowl and you fill it with anything, with rocks,
Yeah.
with candy, with marbles, with any number of different things, and you ask people how many objects are contained in that glass bowl,
Mm.
the most often correct answer is the average of everybody's idea of how many there are.
Yeah.
Because some people guess too many and some people guess too few.
Too
But
less.
when
Yeah.
you average them out, you come up with something that's much closer to being correct.
Mm.
And I think it's exactly the same in human conflicts.
Mm.
So what your opponent thinks, what your opponent feels, what has happened to your opponent actually can help you achieve a higher order solution in resolving your conflicts.
Mm.
But we don't know that, and we don't
Yeah.
feel that way, and we reject it because we believe that one of us should win and the other should lose. So there are two types of victory.
Yeah.
One is a victory over the other person,
Yeah.
and the second is a victory over ourselves.
Mm.
And it's the victory over ourselves
Answer,
that
which is
matters
important.
most. And
Right.
what that consists of is being able to hear what your opponent is saying and
Yeah.
turn it into ideas that could improve what both of you care about.
That is true. Absolutely. So which means a lot what you said has to do with the perception and the perspective. And this
Yeah.
is so subjective that there are so many, as you rightly said, so many moving parts, so many variables that depending on what culture, what situation, what experience, what exposure, what internal conflicts you have, or you are under stress, you have gone through a medication, or there's an external event which has kind of, really shaken you badly. So anything of that sort can can have a bearing on your perception or perspective at a point in time, which again would change with the passage of time, right? Now, which means it's a continuing kind of a emotional change. And when we all expect an answer also which is an absolute answer, I think it really becomes difficult for someone to be so conclusive and confident about it because it's a lot of it is situational. As you rightly said, I mean, you are right, but regarding what? I mean, both the people, both the opponents are right, but regarding a certain aspect of it. So unless until it is very aptly and rightly said, unless until our questions are right, we cannot expect the right answers in any case. So that's of course one. But if I just move this discussion slightly, so we see a lot of art and a lot of science involved, right? And the other day when I was saying this, then I continued saying that the role of an artist is slightly higher than the role of a scientist because you have numbers, you have empirical evidence, you have some data, you have some pattern, you observe, you read, you experiment, all that is fine, that's a science. But how do you imbibe, how do you absorb, and how do you apply in a given situation, looking at the need of the hour and then keep changing? So the point is, in spite of the best of your ability or to retain, grasp knowledge and the data, if you're not able to be flexible and go with the tide, then I think the artist probably is not doing its bit. So the role of an artist to me is much higher in spite of the best scientific data or the pattern it is. Would you agree with that?
I think that two things. One
Yeah.
is there is art and science in understanding conflict.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
and there is an art to every science and a science in every art. And we can
Right.
think about the
Yeah.
human brain as fundamentally consisting of two different hemispheres, one
Yeah.
of which is really an artist and the other is a scientist.
Right.
And here again, what we are looking for is the missing bridge, um, the thing that connects them,
Sure.
um, and allows them to talk to each other and translate what they're saying into each other's terms. So I've been reading quite a bit recently about Einstein's theory of general relativity and how he came to this understanding of general relativity. And there were
Okay.
two pieces of it. One piece was understanding the mathematics
Yeah.
of curved spaces, so that if space is curved,
Yeah.
how do you describe that in some very, very simple way? And the second was highly intuitive
Mm.
and artistic and imaginative,
Mm.
in which he did sort of realized that, for example, if someone is in an elevator and it is going up, um, uh, that feels like the same as gravity. So in other words, there's an equivalence principle between acceleration and gravitation.
Mm.
And that's both kind of artistic and scientific. Um, and if you take a look at the equation of general relativity, the actual mathematical equation, you
Yeah.
can see that not only is there enormous amounts of stuff in it, it's actually gorgeous. It's beautiful. It has a symmetry to it. And a part of what led Einstein to this result was a woman who was a little regarded mathematician whose name is Emmy Noether, who came up with an idea. And her idea was that for every symmetry, there is a law of conservation. And for every law of conservation, there is a symmetry. The two are the same. And this is expressed in Einstein's equation. To me, that is high science and
Yeah.
incredibly gorgeous art. Um, and so, what I like to think about is how to maximize both.
Mm.
So, and rather than choosing between them,
Yeah.
I like to try to find the art in the science and the science within the art. Um, there's a wonderful expression of this that was given by an American writer, Henry David Thoreau, um, who wrote, he said that he had two notebooks that he always kept with him, one for science and nature and observations of the natural world, and the other for poetry, for
Oh.
poems. And he said that his goal was someday to have only one notebook in which every fact was a poem and every
Oh,
poem was a fact.
that's a fact. Lovely. Very
Yeah.
nice.
So that's,
Excellent.
I think that's a beautiful and worthwhile goal to go
Sure.
for.
Absolutely.
Having said that,
Yeah.
there's a bias within the law towards science and against art.
Yeah.
And I think part of what the need that you're expressing
Yeah.
is the desire to increase the valuation of art and
Yes.
say you're wrong to dismiss art
Yeah.
and only focus on science. And I
On
think
science.
you're absolutely right in trying to do that.
Great. So, I mean, it's really heartening that, uh, I mean, getting the confidence that, at least the thought process is on the right track. But yes, we need to learn a lot. We need to observe a lot because, again, there are situations and there are situations. And, when we even see people at times who are ready with answers to even complex issues, I mean, I for sure, I get pretty much disturbed as to how someone can be so confident without knowing the background and like you're right on there. I mean, is it confidence or it's overconfidence? Because we don't even have, because any issue, even if I'm the best of the person who can articulate well or something, I still would be grappling internally with my issues, how to. So my thinking is has a subset which is my writing, and my writing further has a subset what I am kind of really explaining. So there
Mm,
is like a lot which gets filtered, too much happening in our heads. Once we get speaking, I think a bit of it comes out. And by the time you write and you want to be more objective, maybe only a little is left. So these three levels itself, like, give us, a sign of things that how complicated the thinking process itself is, how many thoughts cross our minds in a, in a fraction of a second, and how difficult it is for even us, for us to frame the issues, what we are grappling with, right? So be it the anger, be it a certain other emotion, I think everything kind of gets complicated, and then there's a blurting out of, uh, you know, through words. So this is something which probably puts us on a back foot, that unless until we really understand, and you rightly said initially that what we get to hear in spite of that mental level is only 5 to 10% of the issue. The 80-90% is all which is hidden, the typical iceberg theory, what we keep talking about, because what's lies beneath is the real problem, and to reach that you need patience, patience, and patience. So
Yeah.
the role of mediator, of course, is a real challenge. And Ken, if I may ask, you also spoke about, and you being a judge, and accepted that there's a limitation beyond a point, because you get to hear two sides, and then you need to decide and you need to choose that one of them slightly seems to be on the right side of the law, right? And that's about it. He may not be right, he may not be actually solving the problem, but he just happens to be on the right side of the law, maybe nicely articulated, maybe nicely, given the citations or the law or the precedents, whatever it might be. On a given day, somebody proven was proven to be better than the other side. And and hence the judgment made. But let me bring here the the corona situation, where everyone said that I'm not wrong, uh, and of course wanted to pass the blame. But when people came to me, and these were typical landlord and tenant disputes and all that, and we said, neither are you wrong nor are they wrong, but you both have been wronged, right? Which means it's
Nice.
an external event which
Yeah.
has hit both of you together, right? Nobody is the perpetrator, nobody is the initiator, but you both have been impacted. So the only way, and yes, we were saying that it's unfortunate that we are pushed in this situation, but this is a golden situation, a golden opportunity for you guys to talk it out. Because even if you go to the judge, yes, you have all the right, but I'm really at loss to think through, how can a judge decide for any of you? Because this is something which is so personal, and it's very difficult to point a finger at a particular situation or a reason or something we all been grappling. Now, what I wanted to kind of link this example was, do you see that on a given day even a judge would have an issue if he sees through the problem, and he thinks that both the parties have an element of truth, or both the parties are kind of almost at a equal footing, but still there is a need to pass a judgment, and a judgment cannot be the common ground. Judgment necessarily needs to decide one is right, one is wrong. So in those situations, what exactly happens? Is this justice or a solution, or what exactly? Or we also see this to be, to an extent, a reason why we have a pendency. Because I'm sure there are people who want to be very pure, they want to be very sure about their decision making. And when they grapple in terms of choosing the side, the only option is, let it, let me think through, let's adjourn, let me give a new date, let me think through. And this also adds up. Do you see this as a possibility?
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned bankruptcy before,
Yeah.
and I trained the bankruptcy judges in Los Angeles in mediation.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
And a part of the purpose of that was to say, let's stop before rendering a judgment and see whether it might not be possible to resolve this in an informal way,
Yeah.
using mediation. Now, the difficulty with being a judge or an arbitrator and doing this is that you may hear something that then disqualifies you from a legal perspective in being able to render a judgment. So what makes the most sense is what happens in China and in some other places, which is in China particularly, there are mediators who are attached to the court. And in some cases in the United States as well, for example, in the appellate courts, there are mediators who are attached to the federal courts of appeal. And the judge will say, you have to talk to a mediator before I'm going to hear the case. And in
Oh,
small claims courts, they will do exactly the same thing, and in other cases as well. And then what happens is the mediators come in, and this is a situation in which the mediation has a certain amount of pressure attached to it because everybody knows that if they don't succeed, it's going to go back to the judge and it will come out as a win-lose process.
yeah.
And so there's a lot of pressure on people to try to decide. And it is important for them to kind of have a sense that the way that most people define justice is have I been heard and have my interests been satisfied, which is an issue in mediation, but it's
Yeah.
not the issue that's presented to the judge.
Mm.
So Aristotle wrote very interestingly about the idea of justice, and he defined justice in two different ways. One is justice is due proportion, meaning if there's too much reward, it's not just. If there's too little reward, it's not just. If there's too much punishment, it's not just. If there's too little punishment, it's not just. So trying to find that place where there's just the right amount, that's much easier in mediation than it is
Yeah.
in court.
Yeah.
Because as a judge, I'm required to decide either or.
Agreed.
And the second definition that Aristotle gave was just more of a comment, but I feel that it's a really useful comment. He said, in quotes, justice is someone else's self-interest. But I think that what it actually is the combination of my interest and someone else's self-interest, the creative combination. So what we want to do is to find out whether it is necessary for anyone to lose in order for people to get the things that they care about. And in order to do that, we have to find out what it is that they really care about.
Yeah.
And that means asking them the question, why really are you here? What do you care the most about? What would you like to see happen? None of those are appropriate questions in a court of law.
True.
So for this reason, what it means is I indicated my feeling about it before, which is that if courts of law are able to do justice, they are able to do it mostly partially and accidentally. But in mediation, it's routine. That's what the search is really for, is some kind of justice. And if we want to evolve in terms of our ability to resolve conflicts within societies, we need to allow our dispute resolution mechanisms to evolve as well.
True.
And the law was an evolution itself out of monarchy and dictatorship and autocracy, where having principles that would be decided by a judge based on sort of what the facts were and what the laws were, that was an enormous step forward. And now, as a matter of human history, we are being given an opportunity to see the next big step forward. And that is in the direction of the creation of an equally useful, even more useful conflict resolution process. Because that's what all of this is. It's all conflict resolution. Even dictatorships are about conflict resolution. They're trying to stop conflicts, but they do it by suppressing one side. And the law does it by giving a victory to one side. And what we need to then figure out how to do is, how do we do it without anyone becoming a victor and then anyone becoming vanquished?
Agreed. Okay. Ken, I just need to see your
I'm sorry,
comfort.
there was one other point, a short point I wanted to make, which
Please,
is
please, please.
about restorative justice
Yeah.
is based on the principle that you were describing before, that everyone is impacted by a conflict and
Yeah.
nobody is the perpetrator, or on some level, everybody has been traumatized, and we need to work with everybody's injury.
Right.
So
Right.
yes, you wanted to
Okay.
say one
No,
other
so
thing.
I mean, I have a couple of questions still. I just wanted to seek your comfort. I mean, you're okay for another 5-10 minutes?
Just about, yes, just another
Yeah.
5 minutes or so.
Okay, fair enough. So, uh, yes, the example you gave about Aristotle, it's a kind of a redefining the justice in terms of due proportion. But otherwise, at times we get pained when we hear in the seminars and in discussions that mediation leads to or is a cheaper justice. Now, the concern is with both the terms is a, it cannot, should not be taken as a poor cousin of arbitration, even though it's part of the ADR tool, because to me, these are poles apart. Adversarial versus non-adversarial. Arbitration at best is a private court, a private judge, almost similar settings. You again have to pass an award and prove one right, one wrong. Whereas mediation is absolutely on the other side of the spectrum. But the main point is the moment we say cheaper justice, the problem comes with both the words. It cannot and should not be cheaper because you are helping retain the relationship. You are helping someone not go through the drill of a court or a litigation or adversarial process. And in terms of a justice, uh, we are not, I mean, as a mediator, we are not a judge. We are not giving a judgment. The parties are all empowered. It's a party autonomy, which is the key, and the parties are craving for a solution to move on, to be better off than where they were, right? To retain the relationship. So should we not stop putting justice and mediation on the same platform, on the same pedestal? I mean, that's one concern which I have, and I thought,
Yes.
let me check with you. I mean, because the more we say that, it has become just a kind of a by the way discussion, and people don't even understand the implication. It's not cheap and it is not a justice. Let the justice be privy to a court where they do whatever they do. And as you rightly said, half of the time is accidental where the parties are okay with that. So would you agree with that? That justice should be just slightly moved away from mediation and more solution should be brought in?
Well, I think that there's a lot of confusion around language. And
Yeah,
when you introduce terms like justice,
yeah,
people are going to have very different ideas about what it is that you mean.
right.
Um, and I think it's possible to have the conversation continue so
Yeah,
that people are looking at how to get not to cheaper, but to deeper.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and then I think that the real issue for most people is um, um, the level of satisfaction that they have with the process, and how um, let's see, um, how do I say this? Uh, um, uh, kind of where it leaves them at the end of this process in
yeah,
terms of uh, three fundamental categories. One is how was the process? Did
yeah,
it feel fair to you? Number two, what about the content? Did you feel that you were, in other words, first, did you feel heard? Number two, was there something that was done about the issue?
yeah,
Um, but then the third part is the part that is difficult to quantify, but it has to do with um, what we could call psychological satisfaction, or spiritual satisfaction, whatever. In other words, how did it feel to you?
Mhm.
This process that you just went through. And when people go through the courts of law, they don't feel very good about it unless they win. And
Right,
even if they do win, they still don't particularly feel that great about the process. They weren't really heard that much. They didn't have
right,
an opportunity to have their day in court,
right,
meaning to say what, in their own words, what really happened to them and how it felt, and then have someone respond to that. And so what I think makes more sense, and on some level, is to try to figure out how to describe this process in ways that can be understood by different groups of people. Let me just give you an illustration of this. There's a very interesting man in the United States who's the head of the dispute resolution program at MIT called the Consensus Building Institute. Larry Susskind is his name. And he believes that we should be referring to mediation as informal problem solving rather than as mediation or conflict resolution. And he says this because people don't really understand what conflict resolution is, but problem solving they get. And everybody wants their problem solved. And then the question is, how do you want to solve it? Do you want to do that together, or do you want somebody to step in and solve your problem for you?
Right.
And one way of thinking of this is a shift from a childlike process in which somebody takes control over your life and decides it for you, to a grown-up process in which we each take responsibility for our lives and for solving the problems that we face.
Absolutely.
So it's about growing up on some level.
It's growing up, absolutely.
But how we describe this, I think that we haven't really successfully figured out how to do that yet.
No, fair enough.
And maybe you will do that. And missing bridge helps as an idea.
No. I'm just getting all the ideas, and I'm picking up all the messages so that whatever we can do as an institution, we would. So, Ken, the last question, which is on capacity building, right? About the training. Now, there is, again, as I said initially, at times it's a flavor. So Singapore Convention happened, India had its own Mediation Act. So there's a lot of noise, right? Now we have a lot of programs happening, and even we were like, kind of pushed at times that you should have training as well. Now, absolutely, it's a good idea. Professionals and other people, they need to know more and more about mediation as a process, as an art, as in science, and which means they need to be together, get trained through a trainer, through a faculty, through people, experts. But what exactly is missing? Because a lot of times we hear 40-hour training and somebody says, I'm a mediator. Can I write a certified mediator? Now he has the urge to write a certified mediator after going through 40 hours, whether he was mentally available or mentally present. But, it's another certificate because, again, flavor of the season. Now, what needs to change? So I really wanted to understand, because next week onwards, we are starting. And we definitely want to apply anything and everything which can make an impact. So it should not be a normal training. Of course, this particular session also will be shown to them. But in addition, I think it'll be nice to have from you.
This is a very difficult problem, and I agree with you. I think you've asked an important question. And I will give you a couple of ideas about an answer, but I think we're struggling to get to the answer. In the first place, I wrote a piece in a book that I wrote several years ago called Mediating Dangerously, about the problem of certification and what happens as a result. And a part of what happens in many professions is that it simply reinforces a kind of low level of competence and mediocrity within the profession, and it ignores all the really difficult issues. So if you ask people who are seasoned mediators, what do they wish that they had learned in their training? They will tell you all kinds of things, and I've asked these questions. But in my experience, here's what I think has to happen in the training. One, you need to give people opportunities to work on their own conflicts. To discover from their own conflicts what is working and what isn't working. Secondly, the idea that there can be an objective standard in mediation where you can say, here's what the level is that you have to be able to perform at, and you either pass or you fail, misses the whole point of what mediation is.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. And it isn't possible to say you fail because you didn't ask this question, or you pass because you did, because that could be the right question, because that's the right question for those people in that one moment.
Yeah.
So instead, what we need to do, we're back to the art piece, is to ask a question: how do you determine whether something is a good work of art? And the answer is how you feel about it. But there's no objective standard that you can look at and say mathematically, is this a good work of art or isn't it? It doesn't work that way, or scientifically. Instead, it has to be pleasing. It has to speak to you. And even if it isn't pleasing, if it touches you in a deep place, it can still be art. And so we have to rethink the whole question of training. Because in reality, this is not a kind of training like you would put a dog through a training. This is a kind of life course in discovery and in empathy and self-discovery, in trying to figure out sort of how do we get to the bottom of what isn't working here? And I think we need to really think seriously about how we do that, and maybe rethink the whole question of certification.
That's true, because typical 40R is like, you don't create a mediator, you just at best discover someone who has the traits. But then there's a lot of journey which has to be. So great, Ken. I think we've shot past our 1 hour schedule, but that's been lovely. And I think the kind of knowledge which I had and the exposure, because in 1 hour, that was the best I could have taken from you, I guess. And with a small promise from you that we need to have one more meeting where we'll continue with something which has left
Good.
unanswered. But I really thank you, for taking out time and addressing these queries. And I wish you all the best. And thanks
Thank
again
you.
from all of us at Missing Bridge.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it, Sanjeev. Thank you
Lovely.
very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
A
Thank you.
pleasure.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.